Good.
Okay, hello everybody and welcome to Obsessed Live Show. It's Friday afternoon in Australia, but if you're Tameka, it's 2 a.m. in Atlanta, Georgia. So hats off to Tameka for getting up. Now, Tameka Anderson is the founder of Parenting Confident Kids, and she helps busy moms, if you're in America, or busy mums, if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, raise confident kids who'll grow up and change the world, because that's what we want for them. Hey, Tameka.
Hey. Thanks so much for having me. Can you hear me? Uh-oh, I don't hear you. I don't hear you. It looks like your mic is off. I think I hear you now.
I can't hear you now.
I hear you now.
Me.
I hear you. Can you hear me?
What happened? I'm not muted now, am I?
Now I can hear you. Yeah, I can hear you now. But now I can't anymore.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I am not touching anything. I'm putting my hands up, not touching anything. Okay, let's go back to that. Tameka Anderson, welcome to Live with Obsessed. It's great to have you on here today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Best laid plans of mice and men, as they say. So tell me a little bit about what it is that you do and why it's so important that we arm parents with these skills to have these heavy conversations with kids.
Yeah, so I thought that it's important to raise children to be confident, because I've been working in the children and family industry for over 25 years now. And there's one thing that every single child, no matter the race, the ethnicity, the cultural differences, the backgrounds, one thing that every single one of them all simultaneously understood, I could develop it the same exact way, and it produced the same exact results. And that was building confidence. And so one of the things that I realized is that in building confidence in the child, you are actually building the future leaders. And I think that's what we're supposed to be doing anyway. Children are the future leaders. When we are long gone, they're going to be the ones coming. They're going to be the ones doing the things. So building them up as a child is so much more important than ever. And when you have a confident child, you can talk to them about anything, no matter the subject matter, and they will be able to not only handle it, but this will help to build their tools so that they can use different skills like their critical thinking skills, creativity, communication, and then that will help them to build their skills for the future as leaders, and they'll change the world.
Do you think as parents that maybe we like cushion our kids a little bit too much, that we don't have these big conversations because we think that we're protecting them?
Absolutely. And what I've realized is that out of all of the parents and families that I've worked with, 100% of the time, it is not the parent protecting the child after I dig in. It's the parent really protecting themselves from whatever that resistance is. They feel uncomfortable. They feel the things and they don't want to feel the things. So therefore, they don't know that it's okay for them to tell their child, I do not know. Being confident has nothing to do with knowing everything. Being confident is being okay saying, I don't know the thing. Let's figure it out together. So, yeah.
Isn't it interesting that we seem to think that as adults and as parents that we have to be perfect Do you come across that with the parents that you work with?
Absolutely. And that's another important factor about building confidence as well, too. When you are confident, it doesn't mean that you're perfect. As a matter of fact, it means that you embrace your imperfections. It means that you're okay saying, you know what? I did not do that thing correctly. And then you're able to show the child, which as the parent leader, we're supposed to model that anyway. We're supposed to model how to make mistakes. Like literally, oh man, I made a mistake. Because if not, then you're going to raise a child who is hung up on perfectionism. And, none of us are perfect. So then now you're going to subconsciously, program your child to think that failure is a bad thing. And it's not. It is not a bad thing at all.
So let's talk a little bit about like where you've come, because you have learned at the School of Hard Knocks. You grew up in the foster care in Chicago. So how have you developed these skills when your role models were really not the people who were presenting the best behaviour?
And that is the fascinating part. That's the one of the reasons why I want to help build confidence in children, because me as a child, I totally got it. I understood. I went through a whole bunch of just sadness. I ultimately had to be the adult in a lot of situations when I was a child. And one of the things that I knew was how, if I ever had kids, like I was 7 years old, I never forget having this conversation with myself. If I ever had children, I would never have them in foster care, because I understood the sadness that it brought me. I understood how I felt alone a lot. I understood how I had to advocate for myself. I was constantly in a state of constantly doing. I never felt like I could rest. So it took a toll on me. And when I became an adult and I started, working through the traumas of my childhood, that's when I realized that, oh my goodness, even as a child, I was blazing trails for children because I didn't want any child to ever feel how I felt, which was alone, sad, abandoned, all of those things. And I knew that if I became someone who changed the world, I was doing it big. And so that's what happened.
So you've got kids yourself?
Yes.
Who are fast asleep right now at 2:00 in the morning. Unless, of course, they're 19-year-olds and they're playing computer games, which is what my son does. What are some of the conversations we need to be having with our kids in this current environment? Like we've had coronavirus, we've had the Black Lives Matters protests and riots. Yeah. We've got, politics, like everyone's got an opinion on your president and on our prime minister. How do we introduce these conversations to our kids so that they're meaningful and that they understand them? Because if we want to change these things, then we have to let them know that they exist.
Absolutely. And that, that's the first place you start. You don't try to water anything down, right? So one thing about children is being a writer, I create everything is an acronym for me. So I created the acronym FUN Talks, right? And so FUN literally just stands for Families Understanding Needs. So you want to know what is the need of your family, right? You want to be able to talk to your children about current events. Okay. So a lot of things that I hear parents say is, I don't know how to talk to my children about racism and protests and all of these things. I don't want to expose them to so much violence, all of these things that they're saying. So you want to make sure that you do it in a fun way. So my talks method is simply, the first T stands for truth. What is the truth about the situation? Like you can literally tell the truth. You don't have to sugarcoat anything with children. Okay, that's what's going on now. Well, I remember I did an interview and someone asked me, well, how do you talk to your children about the Black Lives Matter movement? Well, first, you as an adult have to learn about the Black Lives Matter movement. So once you do that, the first T is tell the truth about it, right? The A stands for ask questions. Children are the king and queens of questions. You never have to worry about pushing a conversation forward with a child because they will do it because they ask questions. So it's more so about the parents leaning into whatever the question may be. Yes, it's going to be uncomfortable. Yes, there may be some, oh, I don't really know that. But guess what? We can learn together. So asking questions, getting inside the little mind of the child to say, well, what do you already know? Because you never know what they already know. So asking questions. And then the L stands for listening. After you ask the questions, sit back and listen to your child. You need to understand what they know, how they know it, and what language they're speaking it in, right? So listening to them. Then the K stands for kindness, promoting kindness. If you want to build the confidence in the child, you have to understand that confidence says, I am no better than you. However, you are no better than me. So confidence doesn't compete, right? So you're building the confidence, you're promoting kindness, you're saying what's going on. And then the last S stands for swapping stories. I remember when I was in history class, I had this history teacher. She was so animated. She told me she was a drama major. She was just like, oh, yes. And she was just an excellent storyteller. However, and that made me excited to learn about racism. And so just swapping stories, just learning more about it. If you don't know, dive into it. Yes, it's going to be uncomfortable. It is what it is. But learning so that you can swap stories with your child and say, okay, well, let me tell you this story about this. And what do you know about it? And then the child will say, once upon a time, I shall say, and you sit there, you listen, you have fun, have a few giggles, but at the same time, they are still learning.
Sounds like you and I had the same history teacher. My history teacher was like that too. It was just kind of like, I can't wait to get to history because I know this is just going to be the most interesting lesson of the day.
Yes.
Like, yay. So how do we learn to listen better? Because I noticed that was a really integral part of what you just was talking about, is that, you know, listening helps us absorb the knowledge, but so many of us are listening kind of half and half because we're already thinking about what we want to say before the person finishes. Do you have some tips on how we can better listen to our kids?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the most important things in listening, because as you know, listening is probably, I could teach a whole class on listening. So listening is one of the most important skills that you will ever have, not just as a parent, but as a person. Because when you're listening, that's when you're learning. And one of the things that I realize is that when you are in active learning mode, there's no defenses, there's no walls, there's no judgment. You're not judging anything. And that's where a lot of people get into the arguments. That's what makes it hard, if you will, because there's so much judgment that you got to break through, you know, in order for someone to hear you. However, and this is what I do in any conversation, especially the hard ones, I don't go into hard conversations talking and saying, oh, do this, you do that, blah, 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 blah. I ask questions because I want to listen. Because listening helps to break those walls. Listening helps to put the guards down, to ease the shoulders. That's the only way you're going to be able to have the hard conversation. Is to listen. So number one, ask questions, and lots of them. Just keep asking questions. One of my clients told me that I am the queen of the why. I am. Why is my favorite question? Like, they'll tell me something, and I'll say, well, why? Why did you do that? Well, I did this because he did that. Well, why do you think you needed to do that? Because he did that. And I just keep asking, keep asking, keep asking. So if you don't even know what question to ask why, you know, and just keep asking. The more you ask, listen. And don't listen with the intent of saying, okay, I got to share my part. because then you're not really listening. You're actually wanting to be heard. And what I've realized in listening, the more you listen, the more people will want to hear you because they feel like the law of reciprocity. You know what I mean? A lot of parents ask me, Miss Tameka, how do I get my child to listen? I was like, one easy step. And they're just like ready to write stuff down. And they're like, what is it? I'm like, listen. What? What do you mean, listen? Absolutely. If you listen to your child, they will listen to you. It 100% works. And so just asking questions, really not having that intent of just spitting off stuff but asking questions, be in learn mode, let your guard down, and let the other person feel heard. That is listening.
It's interesting because I don't know if you grew up with this phrase, but my parents were very English, and it was children are to be seen and not heard. Did you ever hear that when you were growing up?
I did.
Okay, so it must be northern and southern hemisphere. But I always felt as a kid how unfair that was, because if there was something that impacted me, like even if it was something I didn't like to eat at dinner, the fact that I was being shut down really impacted my confidence in being able to speak up.
Absolutely.
Is that something that continues even despite how enlightened we are as the generations move on?
Absolutely, because that's one of the things that I realize is that you have no choice but to pass it down from generations because that's what you were taught. I was taught that too. I was taught a child should be seen and not heard. And I'm like, well, that doesn't make sense because as a human, and kids are little humans, everybody has three needs: to be seen, to be heard, and to be loved. So if you're taking away one of those needs, aren't you kind of like taking away the rights of a human? So that doesn't make sense. And I was able to, with my children, to say, yeah, we're going to do things different because I was taught this. However, that didn't really work for me because I had behavior issues. I was the one acting out. But why was I acting out? Because I needed attention. I needed someone to hear me. So I was the class clown. Now I got all A's, but I was the class clown. Why? Because someone needed to know all of this material I've been working on, okay?
I think we're sisters from another Mr. Tameka. I think I was the same at school as well. Was like, oh my God, that's like, oh, we're related. With this like learning to build confidence in our children, what are the, like, besides the obvious outcomes is that they're, well balanced, creative human beings, what are the other benefits of being a confident human being?
Well, I mean, first of all, people love to be around confident people. Absolutely love to be around confident people. Number one, you have self-control. You're very poised. You have patience. You use your critical thinking skills, right? You communicate better. You can resolve conflict. Your curiosity is piqued even more, the list is endless. You have so many great qualities about yourself. And a lot of people confuse confidence with arrogance. And it's the exact opposite because confidence is rooted in security in oneself. Whereas arrogance is rooted in insecurity. Arrogance says, oh, look at me, I'm better than you. Whereas confidence quietly walks in the room and says, I'm no better than you. However, you're no better than me. So confidence is rooted in security in oneself. And when you are able to control yourself, which is the only person you can control, then you can glide through life. Really, you really can. And things come much easier to you because you possess these tools to be able to be resilient, to be controlled, to get things done. And the rest is history.
One of our listeners, the wonderful Haley, has said that we're less likely to abuse drugs and alcohol and go down the wrong path if we're we're certain and have surety in ourselves, because it's harder to lead someone astray when they're going, you know what, no, that doesn't serve me well.
Yep, absolutely, because that's the part of the self-control. You know, you may have a hard day, you may have hard things happening. However, you're not prone to go look an outside source to help you to handle that. You can look inwardly and say, what are the tools that I possess in me that will help me with this? Like, I can tell you for myself, even after all of this started happening and the protests happened, as you can see, I'm a Black woman, right? So it affected me greatly because I have a son, I have a grandson, and I have a youngest daughter who was a 3-time TEDx speaker. And her third TED talk, she actually talked about how she was afraid of the police and how she overcame the fear by sitting down with them, having a conversation. Then this happens and she felt so let down. She was just like, I faced my fears. I was brave. I did all these things and this stuff is still happening. What is going on here? But to be able to use all of those feelings of frustration and just, I don't know what to do isms, to come and be able to share with people like yourself to say, hey, listen, I've designed a program to help parents to overcome these things so that we can end this. This is me doing my part, right? So using your confidence skills to say, I'm confident that this is something that I can do to help end this problem. And then that is how you stay on the path, if you will, even though there's hard feelings, emotions coming up, think life is happening, all of this stuff is just coming at you, but you're still able to be laser focused to say, okay, I'm doing my part and I know that I can help to eliminate this.
I imagine there's a lot of hard conversations happening in families in America at the moment, whether you're Black or white or whatever your nationality or race is, because racism is something that impacts us all, whether you're the racist or you're the person being affected by racism. So how do we, because I think that's a really important thing we need to talk to our kids about. Someone shared, I won't say who it is, very personally with me, how a member of their family had come home from school and said, I don't want to be touched by a Black person, and her mother is Black, and she's getting this from school, and they're 3 years old, and it's like, how do we overcome that? Like, that just gave me goosebumps. It's like it's mortifying. How do we overcome that? Because we need to be able to talk to our kids so that we can eliminate it, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you're familiar with this show. It's called Hate Thy Neighbor.
No.
So there's this show, and it's very interesting. As an educator myself, I like to watch documentaries and reality shows just to see what people actually do. Human behavior fascinates me. And so it's so fascinating to watch this particular show because there's a man who goes around to different extremist groups, and he literally sits a day with them and walks a day in their shoes, if you will, just to see what they do and how they think. And the reason why it was fascinating to me is because, again, I always look for commonalities. I look for the underlying thing. And no matter the group, no matter what they were teaching, of course, there were some hard things that some of them were saying, but in listening, I heard what they weren't saying. And what they weren't saying was, I just want to be seen. I just want to be heard. I just want to be loved. So if you take a side, if you become, my favorite quote is, if you become unoffendable, right? In the fact that, hey, no matter what you say, I am not going to take that to heart so that I am not offended by what you say. If you become unoffendable, then you can get to the root of the matter and say, I don't agree with the way they're saying and doing things. However, we're all the same. We all want the same things. And maybe they don't feel heard. Maybe they don't feel seen. And they feel the only way to do it is to be extreme. You know, fear, what I've realized is hate is not the opposite of love. Fear is the opposite of love because fear produces bad behavior. And that is exactly what happens, with these extreme groups. They're afraid of something because I was listening to what they were saying. I was listening to them say, oh, well, because he asked the question, well, why do you think this way? And he said, well, they do this and they do that. Interpretation is, I'm afraid that they're going to do X, Y, and Z to me because someone told me that, because fear is taught as well too. And someone told me to be afraid of that person. So now I'm holding on to that belief because I trusted that person, whoever taught me to be afraid of that person. So I'm holding on to that. You can't tell me that that's wrong because now, because I don't have a strong sense of self, you're damaging my sense of self. That's the only thing that I have. So I'm going to protect it with everything in me. And that's really what it is. When you get to the root of all of everything that's happening, someone is protecting an extreme belief because they are not secure within themselves to say, you know what, that could be wrong. There may be another way to look at this. And so if you start like that, it's very easy to talk to your children about race because now you're not taking offense. No matter which side you're on, you're not taking on that offense. I don't take offense when people call Black people niggers because I know I'm not one, So it's like I don't take offense to the offendable words because that's not me. I'm like, okay, well, they feel the need to use that terminology. Then I want to understand, well, why? What's going on with them? What is it about that? Them calling that word? What are they getting from that? And so when you seek to understand, that's the listening again too, seeking to understand why someone do or say what they do.
And it's the listening and the communicating and caring enough to hear the person's take on where they're coming from. And I guess it all comes back to, these people who've got extreme views. Like you said, they're not confident. They probably were not seen and not heard and not loved that they have these views. That's the way that I look at it. If you like documentaries, there's a really good one on Australian television, which you may be able to find on YouTube, called Go Back to Where You Came From. And, Australia is a country where we have lots of immigrants and people from all over the world make Australia home. And sadly, a lot of Australians some Australians are racist. And this show put people who had those really hardcore beliefs and put them into a situation where they experienced life from that person's perspective. Was absolutely fascinating, and and they listened and they tuned in and they got to know that person was just like them. They wanted to be loved, they wanted to be heard, and they wanted to be seen. And I think that you would really like that. So if we were going to look at changing the world, it really is quite simple, isn't it, Tameka? We just kind of need to talk to each other, talk to our kids, and listen.
Absolutely. I always, no matter what training setting I'm in, I always use the same motto. We have 2 eyes, 2 ears, and 1 mouth for a reason. We should watch and listen twice as much as we speak. I know I speak a lot. However, I listen and I watch twice as much as I speak because that's the only way you can learn. And when you're in learning mode is the only way you can change anything.
Oh, Tameka, thank you. You are an incredibly wise woman. Tameka Anderson, all the way from Atlanta, Georgia, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and knowledge this afternoon. It's been like eye-opening, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome.